Queen Elizabeth II has been broadcasting a Christmas message every year since she came to the throne in 1952.
Happy Christmas. 25 years ago, my grandfather broadcast the first of these Christmas messages.
These recordings have proved a gift for phoneticians interested in how the speech of individuals may change over time.
It's very, very fortunate indeed for phonetics that she's been producing these Christmas broadcasts every single year since 1952. And I mean, there just is no other kind of recording of the same speaker. And it's not just that it's of the same speaker, but it's under the same sorts of conditions as well.
Last October, I opened the new Canadian Parliament. And as you know, this was the first time that any sovereign had done so in Ottawa.
One of the things which we wanted to find out was whether sound change influences adult speech. Okay, because of course we know that there is sound change, and there has been sound change as well to the standard accent of English for the last 40 or 50 years. But what we wanted to find out was whether any of this sound change rubs off on adults.
The research used acoustic analysis to measure and assess the Queen's speech.
What we were interested in was targeting 2 or 3 vowels, which we know in the standard accent of England have changed in the last 40 or 50 years. I don't know if you've ever listened to any films which were recorded in the Pinewood studios in the 1950s, but if you listen out for what is now the hat vowel, ah, well, 40 or 50 years ago, it was more air. So you would have had things like, that man is wearing a black hat. And so what we were interested then was in seeing in these Christmas broadcasts if there was any evidence then for a change from this ah to ah.
25 years ago, my grandfather broadcast the first of these Christmas messages. Today is another landmark, because television has made it possible.
Well, there were some examples then of a 1950s ah. So you may have noticed that there were 3 words there, and they sounded not like happy, grandfather and landmark, but happy, grandfather, landmark.
As a daughter, a mother, and a grandmother, I often find myself seeking advice or being asked for it in all 3 capacities.
You can hear there that it's a very, very different ah in grandmother. So it's a more open ah with a lowered jaw grandmother, as opposed to the 57 clip, which was air grandmother. The second example is of what we call the fronting of ooh. Once again, then, if you listen out for this in some of these old films which were made in the 1940s and the 1950s, you would hear things like Lucy threw the balloon to Sue. Okay. Whereas, of course, the modern day version isn't an ooh, it's an ooh.
I would like to read you a few lines from Pilgrim's Progress, because I'm sure we can say, with Mr. Valiant for truth.
There's an example of a 1950s ooh where the tongue is further back in the mouth in the word truth.
Last June, Prince Philip and I gave a party for 900 of Britain's young achievers.
There's a very nice example of a fronted oo. This is from 1998 in the word June. And so it's not June with an oo, but it's June, oo, with a fronted oo.
What's important here is that the Queen never actually reaches the modern day versions in her present day speeches. So she is now, as it were, halfway between what these vowels sounded like in the 1950s and the modern sort of, version. So the third example is of words which end in orthographic Y. So it's words then which are spelt city with a Y, happy, and things like that. 40 or 50 years ago, it was what we call less tense. And so that means then that it sounded much, much more like an right? So you would have things like, I'm very happy, city. Right? Whereas if you listen to a modern form of standard English, it's E, right? So you have city, E, happy.
But it's not the new inventions which are the difficulty. The trouble is caused by unthinking people who carelessly throw away ageless ideals as if they were old and outworn machinery.
It is they that help define our sense of duty.
What I'm often asked then in these sound changes is, well, is this actually something which the Queen has done deliberately? Okay, because there is the argument, maybe then she wants to sound like more of one of the people, and so she has consciously made an effort then, to shift these vowels. But I don't think that can be so. And the reason why I think it can't be so is because these are very, very slow changes. Okay, so if you think of the sort of change from oo to oo over a 40 or 50 year period, okay, and it's not a sudden jump, it's a very, very, very slow change, right? So that from year to year, these changes wouldn't actually be noticeable, right? Now, if of course they're not noticeable, how can you do them deliberately? The conclusion is that whether we like it or not, we are all, to a certain extent, influenced by sound change which takes place in the community.
The methodology used is painstaking. The data has to be digitized and labeled, and the speech signal for each word has to be divided up.
So in the word happy, we had to find then where the start is of the a, where the end is of the a, where the start is of the I, and where the end is of the I. Many, 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 many times. Speech sounds overlap with each other in time. So that in a word like happy, although we think of it as an H and then an A and then a P and then an I, what actually happens when we speak is that we say the A at the same time as we say the H. Okay, so if you watch my lips with, say, had on the H, and he, you see they're actually very, very different because I'm anticipating the E or the A in the H. And of course, when you have to divide up speech then into its sounds, well, that's a bit of a problem. So this means that it's a difficult task, and it's one that has to be checked over and over again.
Identifying frequencies is also a key element.
Here is F1, which is the red band, here is F2 in orange, and here is F3 in green. And it's the frequencies of F1 and F2 which are especially important for identifying vowels. And so the reason then why you hear an E as an E and not as an A or an U is precisely because of the frequency location of these two formant frequencies. And so if then we can measure these formant frequencies for, say, U's, and show then that this second formant frequency has shifted from the 1950s to the 1980s, well then that is positive evidence for sound change.